Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Certainly appreciate having everybody here. This is a very exciting time for Nebraska Farm Bureau. We're here today to announce the Friend of Agriculture designation for Senator Ben Sasse in his re-election bid for Senate. So we're very excited about that and looking forward to that. My name is Steve Nelson. I'm president of the Nebraska Farm Bureau. I'm a farmer from Axtell, Nebraska, which is just south of where we're standing. And certainly appreciate again the opportunity to be here and to talk about the great work of Senator Sasse. With me are a number of board members, including our PAC committee, which is made up of Marty Stewart, Kevin Peterson, and then is chaired by Vice President Mark McCard. And so I'll have Mark come up in just a minute and let you know a little bit more about what we're doing and why we're doing this. For those of you that don't know, Nebraska Farm Bureau is a little over 100 years old. During that 100-year time, we've been there to represent farmers and ranchers in every way possible to deal with all kinds of needs, whether they be related to issues on the farm and ranch or whether they be related to issues in Lincoln and Washington. And so we have a very strong history of that. We have members in every county in the state of Nebraska, and we have 85 organized county farm bureaus that are here today and the next 2 days to do the work of during the convention of the Nebraska Farm Bureau Federation. And so again, it's a great pleasure to be here, a great pleasure to have Senator Sasse here and to be able to make this announcement. And now I'll turn the podium over to Vice President Mark McCard.
Well, thank you, Steve. It is a pleasure to be here this morning and to make this announcement for the second time. Just to kind of fill you in on how the PAC works, we are a grassroots organization, and we survey our counties and we get their input on whoever we do get the Friend of Agriculture Award to, and we've done that process, and that kind of brings us to where we are today. But you know, it's really hard to believe, Ben, that it was almost 5.5 years ago that we were kind of going through this process. We endorsed him his first time around, and Steve and I got in the rickety old RV, and we traveled the state for a few days with
tetanus shots.
That's right. Well, I don't know. Maybe that was the problem. And traveled the state introducing Ben to our members and really trying to get to know him a little bit better, and so that we can get a sense of who this guy is. But I have to tell you that kind of after traveling with him, got back home, and as it's maybe kind of normal with someone that you don't know as well, there was a bit of a nagging thing in the back of my head going, does this guy really get it? I mean, does he really get agriculture? Does he get rural Nebraska? And I was just kind of sitting back there, and you know, the closest tie that he really had to agriculture was that he detasseled in the summer times. And so was that enough to really get it? I was also reminded, though, as well, when I got your Christmas card in the mail last week, and I noticed that your family had changed a bit as well in 6 years. Those girls that spent probably an hour on a rope swing at our cabin, probably going off that swing about 25 times as you talked to a group of men in Central City about your vision in Washington. Those girls are women now.
They never sought permission to hit puberty. I'm still angry.
You know, and that little guy that was running around is quickly becoming a young man. And I just want to tell you,
fake news, Mark.
Right, yeah. I want to tell you that we don't take for granted the commitment that you have made to the state of Nebraska. You have served Nebraska in a time that is a very sweet and precious time in your family's life, and we don't take that for granted and the work that you're doing for our state. So I just want to thank you for that commitment.
Thank you.
Back to that nagging thing in the back of my head, does he really get it? Well, I'm here today to tell you that he does get it, and I'm going to talk about a couple different ways that demonstrates the fact that he gets agriculture. First of all, on trade, Senator Sasse fully understands that 1 out of 3 acres in Nebraska go into the export market. He understands that 30% of all the gross receipts for agriculture as a whole go into the agriculture market. I caught a clip of him on the Senate floor here recently imploring Speaker Nancy Pelosi to pass USMCA and how important that is to Nebraska and to Nebraska agriculture to get that done. That demonstrates that Senator Sasse understands the importance of trade. You really can't talk about the senator very long without talking about his role in the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Sasse has confirmed more than 150 judges to the federal bench since 2017, an area of interest to farmers and ranchers as more and more groups that oppose agriculture have turned to the courts to implement activist agendas. And really not only in the ag arena, but areas that really are so important to the fabric of rural Nebraska, issues of sanctity of life and religious liberty, the things that make Nebraska who they are. Senator Sasse's efforts to vet and support judicial nominees who understand and practice judicial restraint rather than viewing themselves as super legislatures have been extremely important. The area of regulations, Sasse has championed efforts to reduce unwarranted regulations on Nebraska farmers and ranchers that needlessly increase the cost of us carrying out business. He was a strong advocate for rolling back EPA's Waters of the U.S. rule that will let the government tell farmers what they could and couldn't do on the land that they own. He has pushed to improve initiatives and reduce trucking regulations in the livestock sector that is so imperative to us being able to carry out business. When it comes to taxes, Senator Sasse has provided a strong voice in agriculture, helping deliver the first major revisions to the federal tax policy in nearly 30 years. Those changes have helped reduce our tax rate within agriculture, doubling the estate tax exemption, and then really important, maintain the ability of farmers and ranchers to fully write off our property taxes that we pay. Just a couple other items that I want to mention. He supports President Trump's authorization of the year-round E15 ethanol. He backed the 2018 Farm Bill that has a critical area that protects crop insurance for farm and ranch families. That was really demonstrated in the ability for the senator to help push the USDA's risk management agency to cover crop losses associated with the loss of the irrigation water from the horrible canal collapse in western Nebraska. Without the work of our representatives, including Sasse, that would not have happened. And then finally, which I think is really important to us here in Farm Bureau, Senator Sasse has been instrumental in opening doors for Farm Bureau to have the face-to-face meetings that provide direct input on several of President Trump's nominees for his cabinet and other political appointments that are just critical for agriculture. So does Senator Sasse get agriculture? Yes, he does. And so is, for all those reasons, it's my great pleasure on behalf of Nebraska Farm Bureau PAC to officially announce Nebraska Farm Bureau designation for the second time of Senator Ben Sasse as a Nebraska Farm Bureau Friend of Agriculture.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Steve. Thank you to the entire PAC board, committee board members, and to all of you involved not just in the day-to-day work at the Farm Bureau organization, but all of you active members. I'm one of 8 people out of 100 in the U.S. Senate who's never been a politician before doing this. And when I first ran in 2013, 2014, we lived off that rickety old campaign bus for 16 months. My kids then were 12, 10, and 2. 2 girls and a little boy, and everywhere that we went in Nebraska, not everybody was as brave as Mark and Steve in wanting to actually ride on the bus, which looked like you probably would need an Ebola vaccine. It was like a rolling fraternity house with 2-year-old snot all over it. Not snot that was 2 years old, but the mucus of a 2-year-old who was regularly vomiting on the bus at that point. And everywhere we went in Nebraska, we were welcomed by people who believe the things we believe, which is that Washington, D.C. is not supposed to be the center of the world. Washington, D.C. is supposed to be a servant community where people that go to serve for a limited period of time and then come back home to the real centers of the world, which is the places where you're living, working, raising kids and grandkids, where you worship on Sunday morning, and where you feed the world. And right now, that isn't how Washington works. When I was running, I regularly said that 5 of the 7 richest counties in America were the suburbs of Washington, D.C., in Maryland and Virginia, where the lobbyists live. It's gotten worse. Now the actual 5 richest counties per capita, median household income, the 5 richest counties in America are the 5 counties that ring Washington, D.C. This is not at all what Washington and Madison and Hamilton envisioned when they said that they would set up a federal center where people would go for a limited time and then come back home. Washington should exist to create a framework for ordered liberty so the center of the world is lived right here. And as we travel across Nebraska, as much as there's a lot broken and depressing in Washington, D.C., as you travel across Nebraska, your spirit is constantly reinvigorated by the fact that the Farm Bureau is a perfect picture of what grassroots, grass tops, local love of neighbor community actually looks like. Entrepreneurship and innovation and volunteerism and persuasion and neighborliness and really dang hard work and productivity. And so I think Farm Bureau is currently at 85 or maybe 87 county level chapters of our 93 counties. And every county you go to, this is one of the most important organizations where neighbors get together and share information. And frankly, my view of this, I'm not going to be a politician forever. Again, I'm one of only 8 out of 100 who's there now, not having been a politician before. I don't plan to stay forever because I think that I live between Fremont and North Bend. The place where we're raising our kids is far more interesting than Washington, D.C. That's just a place to go and work for a little while. And we need to take that message to Washington and explain to them what you all actually do when you grow the food and raise the livestock that feeds the world. And that's what I get out of Farm Bureau. I'm really grateful for this endorsement. You are the most important grassroots organization in Nebraska. So thank you for the endorsement of my reelection effort. But more than that, the most important thing I get out of you all is advice and counsel. We live at the most interesting time in the history of agriculture. There's some weirdo here who told me earlier that he thinks negative 30-degree wind chill is awesome in the morning. That's not normal, but the vast majority of what we think is normal. By the way, on that side point, I was on the phone with the Omaha World Herald on the bus. We pulled up a little while ago, and I was on the phone doing an interview with the World Herald, and I told them, why aren't you here? This is the most interesting meeting happening in Nebraska this week, is that the Farm Bureau is assembled in Kearney. Why are you not here? And their first question was, what's the wind chill? Our bus rolled at 4 a.m. this morning, and I go door to door in lots of counties. In the last 4 months, I think we've done door to door retail politics in about 3/4 of Nebraska's 93 counties. And so this morning before 7 a.m., I was in a coffee shop in York shaking hands, and I will admit that I did check the wind chill because it was dang cold, and it was -5 wind chill in York 2.5 hours ago. So the guy, and I want to find you later, and we were going to drug test you. The guy who said -30 is the best temperature. That's weird. But what's normal that you get to learn from Farm Bureau members is what's the latest in high-tech ag. We have a big rural-urban divide in America right now, and one of my jobs is to help be a translator of that. And we have a really good team between me and Deb Fisher and Chuck Grassley and Joni Ernst. You have 4 Nebraska and Iowa senators who are regularly trying to explain to city dwellers where their food actually comes from because they don't get it. And so right now, you know this, we live at the most productive moment in the history of agriculture, and the Ogallala Aquifer is literally the most productive land anywhere on earth. We live at the most productive time and place in the history of agriculture at per acre yield rates. And so when you have that, you're going to have, as Mark said, a world where 1/3 of all your acreage, of our acreage, goes to trade markets. And so we need to grow and expand those trade markets. We need to explain to city dwellers in the U.S. why agriculture is not some romantic thing. It is that, but it's not the romantic thing they have in their mind from Little House on the Prairie. it is a high-tech industry where per acre yield rates continue to go up, and GPS digitized agriculture has gone from per acre differentiated water and fertilizer and pesticide and seed application to per foot differentiation, sometimes varying by 850% from one foot to the next. If it's flat versus not flat, if it's leaned toward the sun versus having runoff in a shadier area. And that kind of high-tech agriculture we have to be able to explain and translate, and that's one of the basic things that I get from Farm Bureau, and I want to thank you for all the tutorials and all the counsel. And as Mark said, my view is one of the Senate's plenary powers is to hold up or confirm nominees to leadership positions in the executive branch. And so when there are people who are going to be nominated, my first 2 years in office was the end of the last administration, and fortunately in the new administration we get President Trump and a bunch of leaders who understand why red tape and regulation gets in the way of producers. But still, when individuals are nominated to run executive branch agencies, I want to know that they're not going to have a central planner's regulatory instinct, and the best way for me to grill them and to ask hard questions is to enable these people to grill them and ask hard questions. So one of the things I try to do is bring Farm Bureau and other Nebraska farm and ranch leadership from other organizations in the state out to ask questions of nominees to executive branch leadership positions. So thank you for all the counsel that you give me on that as well. I'm going to say just two last things, and then I'll pull up and we'll go to questions about whatever you want to ask me or ask Steve or Mark. It is, as Mark said, incredibly important to have a judiciary of people who don't think of themselves as super legislators who are not accountable to the voters. And so I'm the first person from Nebraska since 1974. I was born in 1972, so I'm 47 years old. It has been 45 years since a Nebraskan was on the Judiciary Committee. And when I was asked to come serve on the Judiciary Committee to fight for President Trump's judges, the reason was because the Judiciary Committee is one of the most important committees we have in the Senate, and this power in the Constitution, it says the president shall, comma, with the advice and consent of the Senate, comma, appoint judges to what? To lifetime appointments. And when you serve on the judiciary, you're putting on a black robe, and that's supposed to signify a whole bunch of stuff. One of the things it signifies is that you don't think you wear a red or blue partisan jersey anymore. You're not a Democrat or a Republican. You're going to serve on the Article III courts, and you're going to serve for a lifetime, because you understand that your job is not to be an advocate. Your job is not to be a super legislator. Your job is not to be a leftist policymaker. And for years, the left has tried to attack the private sector in general, but agricultural and ranching interests in particular, by doing things that they couldn't get done through the legislature where the voters would ultimately have the say. They've tried to get it done through the courts instead. And so it's a pretty exciting thing to say that we have just set the all-time record since the circuit courts were created 110, 120 years ago. We've just set the all-time record for pace of confirmations. We put 160 people on the courts, including 45 now turning 46 appellate court nominees. And the president is nominating great people to the courts, and it has been a real privilege to be able to fight for those. And it doesn't sound like an ag issue sometimes to journalists. I know ag reporters understand this, but a lot of times general journalists don't understand why do farmers and ranchers care so much about the courts. And it's because, you know, if you can make your case, if we can make the case for modern agriculture and the marketplace of ideas, we win. If leftists get to control the courts, they often shut down agriculture and productive activity by people who are hiding behind the fact that they have a lifetime appointment and they're never going to have to face the voters. So fighting for great judges and fighting with the president, he and I probably talk about judges about once every 10 days, and I've become kind of a sounding board for him as he thinks about who to nominate to the courts. That's been a great privilege, and I view it as an ag fighting interest to fight for constitutionalist judges. And finally, I'll just say, Nancy Pelosi needs to schedule the vote on the USMCA. I know that some of the... When we go to questions, I'm sure that some of the reporters want to ask more about this, so I won't make a monologue here, but I'll just say at the top line, We need more markets, but we need more certainty in our trading relationships because you all are the most productive producers, the most productive farmers and ranchers in human history, and there is no way that Nebraska could ever consume all that you produce, and so we need other places to sell. And right now, the only reason that we don't have certainty in the USMCA, the new NAFTA, is because of one person. There is truly one individual standing in the way of certainty in the updating of the North American Free Trade Agreement. And so I'm sure we're going to go here in question and answer, but I just want to say right now in the short term, in the long term, one of my fundamental jobs is to fight for particular trade. We need a lot more Asian trade. We need a bunch of nations that believe in the rule of law, that believe in open navigation of the seaways, that believe in human rights, that believe in not imprisoning 1.5 million Uyghurs as the Chinese are doing with their prison camps. We need a lot more Asian nations to open up trading relationships, and we need Americans, American voters, American citizens, American temporary public officials in the executive or legislative branch to be able to make the global case for more trade. But in the short term, there's no more urgent issue facing American agriculture than getting the USMCA approved. And right now, the only reason it hasn't happened is because of one individual. She needs to get out of the way. She needs to stop her clown show. She needs to stop playing politics. And she needs to give our farmers and ranchers the certainty they deserve. Steve, thank you all for having me.